Welcome to Pickwick Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My Pickwickian co-host for today is James Armstrong. Hey, James, welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I like that tie. What's that on there, embroidered on there?
So this is the crest of the Dickens family.
Ooh.
And so there's a lion that is at the top of the crest, if you can see that lion. And underneath it, it has a number. The number is 2012, the year of the bicentennial of Charles Dickens's birth. And beneath that, there is a mad scribbling that nobody on earth could ever possibly read. And that is Charles Dickens's signature.
I know it.
He had terrible handwriting.
I know.
And you know,
but
you
no
look
flourish.
at that.
There's no long flourish.
No. Generally, he put like a bunch of lines underneath, a big flourish. But this is just the signature. I can't read that. I don't know who could read that. The poor people who had to take his manuscripts and set them. I don't know what they were doing. I mean,
cannot imagine. Did he come up with that crest for the family? Do you know, how did they get a crest?
I think it had been around for a couple of generations.
Okay.
They even had a family motto that John Dickens would constantly impart upon his son, and they were very much a family with pretensions of aspiring to the upper classes, which they were never able to do. I mean, John Dickens was basically clawing at the lowest rung of the middle class.
Yeah.
And
we'll talk about a little bit about that today too, when we hit this chapter, and especially Dickens as a junior law clerk himself.
Yeah.
Everyone, for 20 months, we are talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. Once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part for 20 straight months. Along the way, I'll share some of the items in the Rosenbach's collections. We have complete serial issues of Pickwick Papers. We have a portion of the manuscript. We have many first editions signed by Dickens, earliest surviving literary manuscript by Dickens, actually. I need to share that in the future at some point. Letters, ephemera. We have a lock of Dickens's hair. But for today's episode, number 7, it's chapters 18 to 20. We've got a wheelbarrow, Wellerisms, and widder warnings. So from Mr. Weller. And a tip for all you aspiring poets out there: you can learn what rhymes with tinkle. If you're watching live right now, please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. If you're watching the recording, also, please like and subscribe, and I'd love for you to leave a comment, or if you have questions, leave questions in the comments, and I will get back to you. That's great about your tie, Jay. This is the norm of the segment that we would chat. I started it early. Yeah. It's going to be a rambly day. I'm drinking this fish house punch here, which I'll tell about in a minute. And it's a rainy day here where I'm doing it, and I'm back to the tweed. You're dressed so wonderfully. You look beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm back to my tweeds. I've got the even the like the weather hit nice. I'm very happy to be in my full tweed suit. But any new Dickensian things happening lately, or maybe? You know, I know we've talked a little bit about when you were first on about the Dickens Fellowship Group, or maybe we talked about with Kevin. I'm not sure. Tell people about the Dickens Fellowship Group that you're involved with.
Yeah, so there's a worldwide Dickens Fellowship. If people are in Philadelphia, they can join the Philadelphia branch. If they're in New York, they've got a choice of 2 different branches that they can join. And I have been involved with the Friends of Dickens New York for many years because I found them in a random internet search, wondering if there were other crazy people who celebrated Charles Dickens's birthday, and indeed there are. So we generally take one book. We're not currently doing Pickwick Papers, we're doing Little Dorrit. and we study it over the course of a year. Generally, we're reading more than just one installment per month, but we try to break it up so it's like 2 or 3 installments in one month, and just sort of discuss those. And we always have a big party in February for Charles Dickens's birthday, whatever Saturday falls closest to February 7th. And also the Friends of Dickens New York has started a series with the Pen Club in New York, where we've been giving talks. So I gave a talk on Dickens's illustrators.
Yeah.
And there's someone giving a talk next month on sort of the spooky and macabre in Dickens for October as we enter the
on
spooky
Wednesdays,
season.
I think. I'll post. I don't have the link to those handy, but I'll post it in the Facebook group.
Yeah, it's generally the first Wednesday of the month. So I did one in September on illustrators, and Joe's going to do one in October, sort of a spooky themed Dickens one. And we're planning on doing a reading of Christmas Carol when we get to December. So, we stay active.
Joe Foder's in the chat today. If Joe, if you
good.
Joe, if you have a link for that, put it on there. Put it in the so people have it. Well, it sounds like fun. And so people know there are 2 fellowships in New York City.
Yep.
Because it's New York City, of course.
Yep.
It's like, I don't know, millions of people that it can, 2 fellowships can last. Were you ever involved in the other fellowship, or you just went right into the Friends one?
So I originally joined the Friends of Dickens New York. I have attended some of the meetings and events of the other branch, which is officially just known as, I believe, the New York branch of the Dickens Fellowship. When they were doing Bleak House, I was like, well, I got to go to their meetings too. So I just did two books that year, whatever we were doing, and Bleak House, because that's my favorite. And they sort of set up their meetings a little bit differently. We do at the Friends of Dickens New York, more similar to like the style we're doing here, where we do a lot of reading of the passages out loud and talk about them. Whereas the other branch does more, whoever is the speaker for the particular month sort of does less reading and more sort of talking about it and discussing it. So
Great. I joined up with you guys, as you know, during the pandemic, because you were fully online. It was a lot easier for me.
Yeah.
When we did Martin Chuzzlewit, which I really enjoyed doing, and was hoping I'd continue, but I have 2 shows to run now. I've got not only Pickwick Monthly, but if you guys may have noticed, my background's a little different here. The Sherlock books are out. All the Dickens books. There's actually some Dickens books in the center on both shelves here that I need at hand usually. But most of the other Dickens books wound up back in that part of the library. And I've got the Sherlock out because I'm doing a new Sherlock Monday show that's weekly. And I didn't want to have to keep switching the book. I was literally going to switch the books back and forth. Like every, month I would put the Dickens books back. And I thought, like, that's, the Sherlock books will be up. There's a little Sherlock action figure over here next to Dickens. And because the Sherlock will end, in the spring, and then Pickwick will keep going till October. Then the Dickens will come back probably. More about Sherlock. I'll tell you guys more about Sherlock Mondays at the mid-break if you haven't already watched an episode yet or know about it. I'm also drinking cold punch today in honor of Mr. Pickwick at the hunting picnic, getting toasted. Ooh, I want to hear about that mug in a sec. This is Philadelphia Fish House Punch, which is a 300-year-old recipe. It goes back to the 1730s. The house, the place that it's named for is even older than that. It's a place called the State in Schuylkill, also known as the Schuylkill Fishing Company of Pennsylvania. It was the first angling club in the colonies. And it's still around today as a social club. At some point, it turned into a social club. George Washington was there at one point. Maybe he even had their famous Fish House Punch. Lafayette visited there, most likely. I will not drink as much as Mr. Pickwick did at the picnic, I promise. But if I do pass out, no wheelbarrows. So if they come up and find me pass out, no wheelbarrow. So and that's it, man. Let's get started. We have some preliminary info that I want to talk about with this issue, number 7. Was published at the end of September 1836. Sometimes you'll see the serial parts for this numbered a little. Well, the months are a little different than what I do. It's not uniform as far as I can tell. That we started in March because the first serial part came out at the end of March. The last weekday of the month was magazine day in Dickens's day, and that's the day it came out. So that was the end of March. But some people label that as April, and I've seen places where it started in April and it ended in November. It actually comes out at the end of the month. I know that most people are going to buy it at the beginning of the month, right? Like that's kind of, the way and read it then, but that's the way I've dated these because I think it's more accurate. So this comes out at the end of September. What's interesting is that the last week of September, 1836, also saw the debut of Dickens's first stage play. We think of him, most people think of him only as a novelist, but he was very interested. I mean, we know that he wanted to be an actor, and he loved the theatrical life and did theater later in his life, but he was hard at work writing plays for this first year as well. He had written The Village Coquette, which is another little, burlesque operetta play. That was supposed to debut first, but that got slowed up, and The Strange Gentleman came out. It debuted at the St. James Theatre in London on September 29th. It was a dramatization of his own sketch, The Great Wingleberry Duel, which is included in the sketches by Bowes. And it's also, that Great Wingleberry Duel is also very influential on the duel that happens in Pickwick too. So Dickens is constantly mining from his own work, as somebody who is constantly having to produce needs to do. And The Strange Gentleman was very well reviewed at the time. It played for 50 nights. And I got to think, James, that in the end of September, beginning of October, 1836, and you can see it in some of the letters where he's talking a lot about a lot of theater business, Dickens, it may just be thinking, I'm going to wind up being a playwright. I'm sure I'll continue with these serial things maybe, but it's got to be in his mind that he's going to become a playwright, which he doesn't.
Yeah. And I was just reading that this installment, he got it to his publishers a little later than usual. They still had time to print it and everything. Yeah. But he was really busy.
9 days before magazine day is when he got the manuscript in. That's really tight.
Yeah. But I'm a playwright, and I love Dickens, and I believe that A Strange Gentleman was the first Dickens play that I had read, and I was very excited. Oh, he wrote plays too. I have to read this play. I read The Strange Gentleman. I'm like, really? That's it? That really? No better than that?
Yeah.
And it's
frequently
odd.
Happens with novelists in the 19th century who turn their hand at plays and they're not that great.
But the funny thing is, Dickens's novels as adaptations are so theatrical.
Yeah.
And Pickwick Papers has been turned into stage plays over and over again. So was Oliver and Nicholas Nickleby and all of them. And they work so well on stage, and yet his playwriting is so bad.
Yeah. Well, There are some people who read this and find it really enjoyable. Let me show. It was actually also published right away too. Chapman and Hall published it. Here's the title page for this first edition, a comic burletta in 2X by Bose, first performed. Interesting that it's also by Bose. Dickens knows that's his audience. They know him by that through the Pickwick Papers and the sketches. He's not going to abandon that name as this is who you're reading. He also, Dickens himself came to disown this. He disavowed it, it didn't want anybody, he refused to have it performed later in his life when people were asking, and would not let it be reprinted. So if you were lucky to get this early printing of it, and I don't know how many copies it came out, but it couldn't have been a great deal of them, you were the only ones who were going to get it to read it. So, and
then Village Coquettes, he hated even more.
Yeah.
He said that if he found out that there was a copy of the Village Coquettes somewhere in his house and he couldn't get rid of it any other way, he would burn down that part of his house. That's how much he hated the play.
Well, it's easy to find now to read, and you can read it online. And I put a link in the live chat here. But and when Village Coquette debuts in December, we'll talk about this in the December issue. But the Strange Gentleman was going for like one more performance, so he had two plays on the stage at the same time in December, plus the Christmas issue of Pickwick, which is, well, for me it's iconic. So he was paid £30 for the acting copyright for Strange Gentleman. It also played New York the next year, played the Park Theater in New York in September 1837. It played in Philadelphia, of course, at the Chestnut Street Theater on January 29th, 1838. So it was moving along. And those first couple of years, it's not like Dickens was the household name in America yet, just for the Pickwick Papers. People liked it and they bought it, and they bought pirated editions is what they did. But he wasn't huge yet in America, yet his plays were still on the stage as well. So he's a successful author. Turning back to Pickwick, then he's also getting a raise soon. He's going to get in a letter dated at the end of August 1836. He mentions that there's a new deal with Chapman and Hall, and he's going to get £25 per month after the November number, or with the November number. I'm not quite sure how it refers to it. So the original deal that Dickens struck with Chapman and Hall, he would get £14 per number. Technically it's £9 per sheet, a printer's sheet, and the first two issues were actually 1.5 sheets, and then the text increases with number 3, so it becomes 2 sheets. So he was probably making £18 a month by the third issue. I know he had a raise there. That was likely the raise. Went from 14 to 18. And then for 4 and 5 in June and July 36, he got £20 per issue because it started taking off. And they would like post date these. He would say like, hey, I think number 4 went real well. And then they paid him money that would have equaled as much for those 2 months, even though the one had already passed. And now he's cut a deal that'll get £25 per month. By the end, actually, it was in August 1837, he agrees with Chapman and Hall to just receive £2,000 for the entire work. So whatever he had already been paid, they would subtract for that. And what it works out to is he gets £100 per issue per month, wow. Which is astronomical for a monthly serial publication. You think he started at 14 a month And by the end, they were like, 100 pounds is worth it because we're getting rich. And Dickens knows this, of course. So, and they've got all the advertising that would just grows and grows in every issue. So Chapman and all do quite well with this. Oh, it's going to be hard not to just drink this fish house punch frequently all day. It's very tasty. It is. If I don't think, did I say the ingredients? I may have to repeat myself a lot today drinking this. It is very potent. It is a bottle of rum, a bottle of brandy, like a half a bottle of peach brandy, and then sugar, lemon juice, and some lemons in it, and water. And it's probably like a quarter water or a third water by the end, because then you also want to let it sit in a bowl with ice. If you had like one block of ice, that's ideal, but I don't have that because I just have a regular ice maker. So it's just a bunch of ice in it. That actually helps with the flavor and helps release it. And you want it open like that after you make it. You can't just make it and drink it. It doesn't taste good.
No.
You need to let it sit for a while, and then you need to let it sit open in ice, and it's totally delicious, but really potent. I mean, like I said, it's booze plus booze plus booze, a little water and sugar, and lemon. That's the kind of punch Dickens would like.
He liked his punch.
Yep. I didn't put any nutmeg in it, though. That's Dickens's favorite. Add nutmeg to everything. All righty. Let's get to the issue then. Last month, our Pickwickians were treated to a recitation of Mrs. Leo Hunter's masterpiece, Ode to an Expiring Frog. Jingle reappear. Oh, and do you want to do it? You haven't done it yet. Do you want to do Expiring Frog?
No, that's quite all right. But thank you.
I'd love to an Expiring Frog. Jingle reappeared. He plays a trick on Mr. Pickwick, and the last chapter ended with another of the interpolated tales, The Parish Clerk, A Tale of True Love. We're starting to get to the point, or at least I am, because I have so many things running on my life, that the monthly, like when I get to this, I'm thinking like, that was last month? Like I'm starting to get that thing that went on with Dickens's audience, where I have to like really remind myself, is that what happened last month? And I kind of stay in it through the month because I'm prepping things, but it's still such a ways off. It must have been hard for this original one. And maybe that's why it's helpful that, especially with Pickwick Papers, that it's a bunch of fun adventures and you don't have to hang on to the details for all of them. But of course, later novels will be very connected, and it's important. So, do you have any issues hanging on to what was last month for this, James?
Not really. I mean, at this point, it's so disconnected that other than the fact that we have the discussion with Mrs. Bardell recently in the book, which comes up in this installment because now he is getting sued for breach of promise of marriage. So it goes back to that incident that we saw before, but very little else do we necessarily need to have read the earlier issues. I suppose in the first chapter, we're also going back to the election, because they're still talking about the election, but the election is over and we've already moved on to something new. And so the discussion that we have with Mr. Winkle really isn't about the election. It's just sort of about the ongoing feuds in the newspaper that are fueled by all of the partisan fighting. Fortunately, here in the United States, we've gotten beyond that. Once our elections are over, we put aside our partisan differences and never, ever fight.
Yes. Well said. Yeah. Well, another way that Dickens is so relevant, right? I mean, how does Dickens get modern politics so well? Because in some ways people don't change. So Well, that's where we are today. Like, and here we are at chapter 18. Briefly illustrative of 2 points. First, the power of hysterics, and secondly, the force of circumstances. Winkle is still staying with the Potts. And who else is staying with them? Is it Tupman?
Yeah, I think it's Tupman.
Yeah, Tupman and Winkle are
Yeah.
still staying with them. And Pot is kind of too busy with his newspaper. It says deeply immersed in the intensity of his speculations for the public weal and the destruction of the independent. Mr. Potts is a little too involved in doing that work to really pay attention to what's going on. And we know from past episodes that, Winkle has been hanging out with Mrs. Potts all the time, everywhere, and she's loving this. He is the he's the cultured gentleman from the city visiting her in this, backwater town, able to, entertain her. And Winkle's sitting alone in the breakfast room. The door is hastily thrown open, and Mr. Pot, who's stalking majestically toward him and thrusting aside his proffered hand, ground his teeth as if to put a sharper edge on what he was about to utter, and exclaimed in a saw-like voice, James.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't have that up.
I just thought you might have known it right away. Serpent.
That's right. Serpent.
He is angry with him. It turns out that there is a article in the Independent, the rival. Remember, Pot edits the Gazette, and the Independent is his enemy. And he throws the journal across the table to Winkle to explain what is going on. And do you want to read that part? Our obscure and filthy contemporary. This is the article that ends with the poem.
Shall I read just the poem or the whole article?
Oh, read the Our Obscure and Filthy.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Our obscure and filthy contemporary, and some disgusting observations of the recent election for this borough, has presumed to violate the hallowed sanctity of private life, and to refer in a manner to be misunderstood to the personal affairs of our late candidate. Aye, and notwithstanding his base defeat, we will add our future member, Mr. Fitzkin. What does our dastardly contemporary mean? What would the ruffian say if we, setting at naught like him, the decencies of social intercourse, were to raise the curtain which happily conceals his private life from general ridicule, not to say from general execration? What if we were even to point out and comment on facts and circumstances which are publicly notorious and beheld by everyone but our mole-eyed contemporary? What if we were to print the following effusion, which we received while we were writing the commencement of this article from a talented fellow townsman and correspondent? Lines to a brass pot. Oh, Pot, if you'd known how false she'd have grown when you heard the marriage bells tinkle, you'd have done then, I vow, what you cannot help now, and handed her over to W. ...
What? Said Mr. Potts solemnly. What rhymes to tinkle, villain?
What rhymes to tinkle? Said Mrs. Pot, whose entrance at the moment forestalled the reply. What rhymes with tinkle? Why, winkle, I should conceive. And saying this, Mrs. Pot smiled sweetly on the disturbed Pickwickian and extended her hand towards him. The agitated young man would have accepted it in his confusion, had not Pot indignantly interposed. "Back, ma'am, back," said the editor. "Take his hand before my very face." "Mr. P," said the astonished lady. And it continues from there.
Yes. Another great comic poem from Dickens, who really understands how to write poetry badly, to comic effect, right? Like, that's a skill, to be able to write a poem that's as we know with Expiring Frog, that it is a skill to be able to create a poem that is terrible but fun in its terribleness. Pot's been called out in the Independent, and it's true, right? I mean, Winkle has been going around with Mrs. Pot. They're not having an adulterous relationship, but they are spending all of this kind of time together. He is her constant companion. It is very noticeable to everybody watching that this is going on. And Mrs. Pot doesn't care at all. She's, she doesn't want to hang out with her husband at all. And she loves the fact that, he gets to, that she gets to have Winkle as a companion.
It strikes me that there's a parallel between this and Mr. Pickwick being put in the pound. Because in both cases, somebody has, in fact, done something that, it's not illegal to hang out with somebody's wife. It's not illegal to have a little bit too much punch, I suppose. But they both sort of get called out for it in a very public manner. They get horribly embarrassed, but ultimately they have to be able to laugh it off. Because you did do something that other people might make fun of, but it's not like you can seriously drag them to court and sue them for defamation of character or something like that. You just have to laugh it off.
Well, Pickwick can laugh off his incident, and Wardle helps him with that when we get to it later, but Pot certainly can't laugh off his. He's the important editor of the Gazette, and there's no way that he could laugh this off. That's part of the humor for us, too, is that he's too self-important to be able to survive something like this. And Mrs. Pot is, he can't stand up to her anyway. She kind of rules him, and Mr. Pot winced beneath the contemptuous gaze of his wife. And what did she say? "Upon my word, sir." And then Dickens goes on, "There appears nothing very tremendous in this little sentence, 'upon my word, sir,' when it comes to be read, but the tone of voice in which it was delivered and the look that accompanied it, both seeming to bear reference to some revenge to be thereafter visited upon the head of Pot, produced their effect upon him." She's in charge. She finally reads the article, the paragraph. She shrieks, she falls down, scream. This is the hysterics, screaming, knocking with her heels. And then her companion, her bodyguard is what Dickens calls her, which I think is hilarious, right? Very fortunately, however, attached to Mrs. Potts' person was a bodyguard of one, a young lady whose ostensible employment was to preside over her toilet, and then helped her with all kinds of other things. Her bodyguard, Goodwin is her name, comes in and to help her lady out. And they have these exchanges where it's 2-on-1 against Mr. Pot, with the both of them there. He can't handle both. He looks timidly on and says nothing, and then finally, I never believed I never believed it. He said, "I never believed that the paragraph had any foundation, my dear. Impossible." And then he promises, well, actually, Mrs. Pott says, "Oh, Goodwin, does he mean to horsewhip the editor of the Independent? Does he, Goodwin?" And of course, now Pott has to agree that, of course, before the day is out, he says he will take a horsewhip and go and take it to the Independent's editor. So, whose name I can't remember, because he is named later in the book, and now I can't remember what it is. Somebody in my Philadelphia Pickwick Club has his name as their sobriquet too, and I can't remember what it is. But we'll get to it in that chapter later when the editor of the Independent is named. Then it is Mrs. Pott is again like, "You're not going to after all this commotion, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Pott then still says to Winkle, "You will not allow this base newspaper slander to shorten your stay here, Mr. Winkle," said Mrs. Pott, smiling through the traces of her tears. And this is a great response from Mr. Pott. Well, what he thinks here. "I hope not," said Mr. Pott, actuated as he spoke by a wish that his visitor would choke himself with a morsel of dry toast which he was raising to his lips at the moment, and so terminate his stay effectually. Winkle says, "Oh, certainly he will stay, but he has to, he would stay, but he has to leave to go meet with Mr. Pickwick." They just had a note that they have to join Mr. Pickwick, and Mr. Pott thinks, "If he ever comes back, I'll poison him." And thought Mr. Pott as he turned into the little back office where he prepared his thunderbolts. And then Winkle, "If I ever do come back and mix myself up with these people again," thought Mr. Winkle as he wended his way to the Peacock, "I shall deserve to be horsewhipped myself." That's all. So that's the end of the stay with the Pottses. Winkle and Tupman go to Bury to meet up with Pickwick at the Angel. And Wardle is there, Mr. Wardle from Dingley Dell, who greets Tupman. You remember Tupman was involved with Miss Rachel. This is the first time he's seeing, Wardle's sister, Miss Rachel. It's the first time he's seeing her since that whole incident happened. And Wardle's like, "Don't worry," And then he tells them all, and this is just for reference later, he says, "We must have you all down at Christmas. We're going to have a wedding." And that'll be the great, Christmas issue in December. And just that line there, I mean, we know Dickens is just sitting down every month, and he'll make some connections through from month to month, but we think of him as just kind of sitting down and just like dashing this off. But he does have a plan going forward in a sense, and he also knows that I need to have a Christmas issue in December, which we'll get to. And now he's laid the seed for it. So he's already thinking, I need to have a Christmas issue, and it's going to be also with a wedding, and it becomes, the great Christmas issue with the goblins who stole a sexton. Yeah. The wedding is one of Wardle's daughters, right? Yeah, his one daughter is marrying Trundle. Bella and Trundle are going to get married.
Which at first Tupman is like, wait, there's going to be a wedding, and probably thinks that it's Rachel.
Yeah.
But no, it's not.
Rachel's been packed off to relatives. At least according to her, she says she couldn't bear to see the girls. And so I let her go. She was too embarrassed to be with her nieces anymore after she ran off with a man. So she's living with other relatives now. I don't remember if she comes back at Christmas, but we can get to that then. Winkle tells Mr. Pickwick the story about the malicious libel of the Eatanswill Independent and the consequent excitement of their friend, the editor. And Mr. Pickwick loses his temper quickly. And he, to have one of his friends, thought of as a scoundrel who would take a man's wife like that. And Mr. Pickwick has this great little speech here. Why don't you just do that little speech? It is not a wonderful circumstance.
Is it not a wonderful circumstance, said Mr. Pickwick, that we seem destined to enter no man's house without involving him in some degree of trouble? Does it not, I ask, bespeak the indiscretion, or worse than that, the blackness of heart, that, I should say so, of my followers, that beneath whatever roof they locate, they disturb the peace of mind and happiness of some confiding female? Is it not, I say? Mr. Pickwick would in all probability have gone on for some time had not the entrance of Sam with a letter caused him to break off in his eloquent discourse. He passed his handkerchief across his forehead, took off his spectacles, wiped them, and put them on again, and his voice had recovered its wonted softness of tone when he said, "What have you there, Sam?" "Called at the post office just now, and found this here letter, as has laid there for 2 days," replied Mr. Weller. "It's sealed with a vapor, and directed in round hand." "I don't know this hand," said Mr. Pickwick, opening the letter. "Mercy on us, what's this? It must be a jest. It can't be true." "What's the matter?" was the general inquiry. "Nobody's dead, is there?" said Wardle, alarmed at the horror in Mr. Pickwick's countenance. Mr. Pickwick made no reply, but, pushing the letter across the table and desiring Mr. Tupman to read it aloud, fell back in his chair with a look of vacant astonishment, quite alarming to behold. And of course, this is the letter that he himself is being sued for breach of promise of marriage. He is being accused of the same thing.
I'll do the letter. Freeman's Court, Cornhill, August 28th, 1830 or 1827. I'll say there's a discrepancy here. And actually the first serial, he had written 1830, which is wrong. It should be 1827. And then it was changed to 1827 for the first couple print editions. And then it went back to 30, like just mistakenly. So you may have an edition that says 1830. It should be 1827. That's the year when all this is taking place. Freeman's Court, Cornhill, August 28th, 1827. Bardell against Pickwick. Sir, having been instructed by Mrs. Martha Bardell to commence an action against you for a breach of promise of marriage, for which the plaintiff lays her damages at £1,500, we beg to inform you that a writ has been issued against you in this suit in the Court of Common Pleas, and request to know, by return of post, the name of your attorney in London who will accept service thereof. We are, sir, your obedient servants, Dodson and Fogg. Just at the moment, Pickwick is saying, like, people are, accusing us of disturbing the peace and mind of confiding females. My friends, they're accusing my friends of this. A letter comes in, and he is being accused of the same thing. The silence was at length broken by Mr. Tupman. Dodson and Fogg, he repeated mechanically. Bardell and Pickwick, said Mr. Snodgrass, musing. Peace of mind and happiness of confiding females, murmured Mr. Winkle with an air of abstraction. Winkle's really annoyed with Pickwick. This kind of high-mindedness, and then Pickwick still in the boat that they're in as well. This all refers to the incident that we remember happened in with Mrs. Bardell in it's chapter 12. So was it number
third number
3? Yeah, number 3.
Yeah.
Or 4 with Sam. And then because Sam comes in at the end, because that's Sam is talking about, and that's it. So it's 4.
Oh, okay.
Or 5. So 4 or 5, whatever. Anyway, chapter 12, which was titled descriptive of a very important proceeding on the part of Mr. Pickwick, no less an epoch in his life than in this history. And then it's just this scene, and why is this so important? This is why it's important. Again, Dickens has in mind that this is something that's going to carry through the novel. The setup is Mr. Pickwick is asking Mrs. Bardell if she thinks it's a better expense for two people to live here, and he has in mind a person that will be the companion to her and her boy, and she thinks he's proposing to her, but what he's really saying is he's like, I'm about to hire a manservant. That's the companion he's thinking, like the companion for himself, and that will help her. She misunderstands, and then we get this exchange. She says, "Oh, you kind, good, playful dear," said Mrs. Bardell. And without more ado, she rose from her chair and flung her arms round Mr. Pickwick's neck with a cataract of tears and a chorus of sobs.
"Bless my soul," cried the astonished Mr. Pickwick. "Mrs. Bardell, my good woman, dear me, what a situation. Pray consider, Mrs. Bardell, don't, if anybody should come."
"Oh, let them come," exclaimed Mrs. Bardell frantically. "I'll never leave you, dear, kind, good soul." And with these words, Mrs. Bardell clung the tighter.
"Say, pardon me," said Mr. Pickwick, struggling violently. "I hear somebody coming up the stairs. Don't, there's a good creature, don't." But entreaty and remonstrance were alike unavailing, for Mrs. Bardell had fainted in Mr. Pickwick's arms. And before he could gain time to deposit her on a chair, Master Bardell entered the room, ushering in Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Snodgrass.
Mr. Pickwick was struck motionless and speechless. He stood with his lovely burden in his arms, gazing vacantly on the countenances of his friends, and without the slightest attempt at recognition or explanation. They, in their turn, stared at him, and Master Bardell, in his turn, stared at everybody. I would love to do this whole scene again, but that's the kernel of it. He's been caught, she fainting in his arms, and the friends all make fun of him at the time, right? They're all like, "Oh, I'm sure nothing's going on here, Mr. Pickwick, don't worry." And but the point of it all is that Mrs. Bardell really did think he was proposing to her, and now that he's not followed up, he's just gone away and he's traveling through the country, she's suing him. And you could do this in England in the 19th century. Remember, a marriage proposal was a business arrangement as well. And if you broke it, you could be seriously damaging not only the reputation, but also the prospects, also the financial prospects of another person, and male or female. I mean, if you were a man who was in a man could sue a woman, in a time, especially if she was, a rich woman, but it's more often than not the other way around that would happen. Sometimes it would happen with important families, and it's just really the reputation of, being scorned by someone when they were supposed to be married, that people would wonder, like, oh, is there something wrong with her then? And it could damage, someone's chances for making a good marriage. But it can happen. You can be sued. Once you promise, you got to stick to it.
Well, this is the plot of the first Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, Trial by Jury.
Trial by Jury, is that what it's called?
It's all about a suit for breach of promise of marriage. And the opening song is the judge talking about, how he had risen up through the ranks by sort of flirting with various women and leading them on and then ditching them when a better prospect came along, and he rises to become a judge, and now he's trying to suit for breach of promise of marriage, basically what he did to get to his position.
That's great. All righty. Yeah. And you'll find it in fiction, but it's also in real life. Dickens isn't really exaggerating here. This is something that can really happen to people. Winkle sees the irony in this right away. Well, Pickwick is, whoever heard me address her in any way but that in which a lodger would address his landlady. And Tupman says, except on one occasion, and the occasion we're referring to, she certainly was reclining in his arms. And Winkle says, and our friend was soothing her anguish, said Mr. Winkle, rather maliciously. Even that word maliciously, I mean, Winkle's really enjoying this. And I was like, is he just angry for Pickwick taking that high road about the confiding females? Or I'm not sure why he's being so malicious here, in a sense, right? Like, I know Pickwick has these little tiffs with his friends here and there, but this seems almost, I don't know.
I didn't read it as malicious.
It doesn't seem it to me. That's the word he uses.
Well, he definitely is pointing out, well, that this is what we've all seen with our own eyes. But Winkle, perhaps as a person who is himself want to pretend that he is something that he is not, since he goes around acting like he's the great sportsman.
Yeah.
And, he would have very grave difficulty hitting the side of a barn with his shot.
He's going to hit something, as we'll find out later.
Just not what he's aiming at generally. Yeah. Maybe he is a little keyed into that sense of, you're kind of pretending to be something that you're not quite.
Maybe it's like a gleeful malice. It's like, now you're like, I'm embarrassed at Potts's with this article, and now you're the one that's going to get it.
Little bit of schadenfreude there.
Well, Wardle thinks this is hilarious. Hello, for a case in which there's nothing suspicious, this looks rather queer, eh, Pickwick? Sly dog. And he laughed till the glasses on the sideboard rang again. So I like Wardle. He's just willing to laugh everything off. Of course, he's, the rich squire of the country. He can afford to. But Wardle finds it funny. Sam gives us the final commentary in this chapter. As he's leaving, he's going to get Pickwick sends him out to get a couple places on the coach to go to London to argue this case for Dodson and Fogg. And Weller says, "Rum feller, the Hemperor." The Hemperor, that's great. "Rum feller, the Hemperor," said Mr. Weller as he walked slowly up the street. "Think of his making up to that ere Mrs. Bardell, with a little boy too. Always the vay with these here old uns. Howsoever, as is such steady goers to look at. I didn't think he'd have done it, though. So Sam's just kind of like amazed, like, really? The Hemperor was, having his way with Mrs. Bardell? He's a little surprised by it, but he still kind of believes it. There was visual evidence. People are believing that this actually occurred. Chapter 19. A pleasant day with an unpleasant termination. Very short title for a chapter title that could have been really long. We know Dickens loves that. It is the first day of September. And another reminder, Dickens is constantly reminding us too, that his serial is running seasonally, monthly, concurrent with the readers. So, as people are, it's like it's happening live. Now it's in the past. It's 1836 when they're reading it. He set the novel in 27, but at least seasonally it can, live along with his audience. And now they're going on their hunting expedition with Wardle. And they meet up with him, and Winkle is immediately worried. If everybody remembers, Winkle shot Tupman the first time that Wardle took him out hunting at his estate, because he has no idea how to fire a gun, and he just had a loaded gun, and boom, it just went off, and because your finger hit the trigger. and he shot Tupman, and who was okay, but Miss Rachel got to nurse him back to health and kind of, further their relationship. But they have a couple back. They have these. They're going to go for. They're hunting birds. What kind of birds? I can't remember.
Not rooks this time. It was rooks last time.
Yeah,
I think partridge or something.
Yeah, they're off hunting birds, and Winkle's like, they don't suppose we're going to kill game enough to fill those bags, do they? They have these giant sacks that they're going to fill up and fill them, says Wardle. Of course we will. Then stick them in our pockets. And then they finally get out. They meet the gamekeeper. And Mr. Winkle, who was holding his gun as if he wished his coat pocket to save him the trouble of pulling the trigger. I guess he's got it kind of, in his pocket. And then Mr. Tupman, who was holding his as if he was afraid of it, as there is no earthly reason to doubt he really was. So it's both Winkle and Tupman with guns here, two men who should not have loaded weapons on them. Winkle they're walking along. Winkle got himself so mysteriously entangled with his gun in his modest confusion that if the piece had been loaded, he must inevitably have shot himself dead upon the spot. And he contrived to bring the barrel into pretty smart contact with Mr. Weller's head. I mean, it's the visual comic possibilities of this scene with Winkle like going around and sticking the gun accidentally in people's faces and hitting them on the head, and is really what Dickens is describing here. Another way that like you mentioned earlier today about the theatrical possibilities of these novels. I mean, it's what Dickens is imagining. I always think that he's just imagining that. Like Dickens can see everything acted out in his books, but the reason he can do that is because he thinks of the stage. He thinks of watching people perform, and then his characters do that. And I've said this before too, like frequently chapters in Dickens start out like a play, like the scene, like the curtains open and like he describes the whole scene and what's there. And then as each character comes in, he describes what they're wearing, their costume, right. And what they're doing. And then, then the action starts to unfold. So Winkle and Tupman don't know how to even hold their guns, walk with their guns, let alone shoot them. We get a moment here just because this comes into play that Wardle asks the boy, where did you tell the boy to meet us with the snack, Martin? And he tells him at this other place that happens to be Captain Boldwig's land. Boldwig's land. Boldwig, it's a great name for him as we meet him later.
Yeah.
But there will be nobody to interrupt this, and there's a fine bit of turf there. So the land that they're on, it belongs to Sir Geoffrey, and they're allowed to be there to hunt. He's in Scotland, and they're apparently heading out with his gamekeeper, and so they're allowed to be there. But this is a serious thing in England always, that people would, you weren't allowed to hunt on other people's land, so or even be on it at all. There's and then they have to figure out, all right, what's Mr. Pickwick going to do? So, and it's just from like the rheumatism, right, that he had after being out in the rain that night and being thrown over a wall and then out in the rain and then stuck in a closet, and then he was sick for a couple days. Pickwick hasn't recovered yet, so he can't really walk a long distance out in the hot sun. But he also can't shoot, and he doesn't want to shoot. Like, he's not like the others Pickwickians where he has to prove that he can shoot. If he can't do something, he's like, oh, I have no idea how to shoot. I don't do that. He did that at Wardle's, at Dingley Dell. He wouldn't go out shooting with them. He didn't mind going, but he's like, oh, I'm not going to handle a gun. But he wants to go, and they have to figure out, how can Mr. Pickwick go? And the boy says, there's a barrow the other side of the hedge, a wheelbarrow. And the gamekeeper's like, we are not putting one of these gentlemen in a wheelbarrow. But, you know, the gamekeeper, it says, having been coaxed and feed, meaning given a fee, given a, yeah, I think we will. And he's given a, you know, a little more money. And he punches the head of the inventive youth. He allows the wheelbarrow to happen. So Mr. Pickwick is put on a wheelbarrow. Sam is going to cart him along. Winkle and Tupman are still going to carry their guns, which really upsets Pickwick. He's like, oh, tell him to point his gun elsewhere. And off they go on the hunt. Well, they get in place. The dogs see the birds, right? And then they all have to shoot. And Winkle doesn't even shoot. He doesn't even know what's going on. Am I supposed to shoot? And they're like, well, not now. And then the gamekeeper says, if the gentleman begins to fire now, perhaps he'll just get the shot out of the barrel by the time they rise, by the time the birds come up. Everyone laughs. I like these little interchanges with Sam and Pickwick too, just kind of off to the side. Ha ha ha, roared Mr. Weller. Sam, said Mr. Pickwick. Sir, don't laugh. Certainly not, sir. It reminds me of a little kind of Jeeves and Wooster thing going on there, right? I mean, Sam's completely different from Jeeves in the Woodhouse stories, but it's brought to mind because I'm reading a little bit of Woodhouse lately, and I've been writing, and somebody's been sending me emails about them making all these Dickensian connections, and there is a kind of relationship here between the two of them where the one takes care of the other that's very much like Woodhouse's Jeeves and Wooster. But that exchange certainly, like in different voices, it could have been them. Mr. Winkle realizes, oh no, that's Tupman.
Well, Tupman actually hit something.
Well, yeah, accidentally, but
yes,
they think it's for real. But Winkle, in the performance of some very intricate evolutions with his gun, if Winkle, in the performance of some very intricate evolutions with his gun, had not accidentally fired at the most critical moment over the boy's head, exactly in the spot where the tall man's brain would have been had he been there instead. Winkle's having a hard time still. I never saw such a gun in my life. It goes off of its own accord. It will do it. So he's got a self-firing gun. That's the problem. They gave him the self-firing gun. Well, you're right. Tupman has a great, then Wardle says, I wish it would kill something of its own accord. And the gamekeeper says, it'll do that afore long, sir. What do you mean by that observation, sir? Inquired Mr. Winkle angrily. Never mind, sir, never mind. I've no family myself, sir. And this here boy's mother will get something handsome from Sir Geoffrey if he's killed on his land. Load again, sir, load again. Take away his gun, cried Mr. Pickwick. This is a really funny scene as it plays through with these bumblers trying to hunt. Well, as you said, Tupman here, right? Tupman knows how to do this.
Well, not really, but he hit something by accident at least.
Right. First, to discharge his piece without injury to himself, and secondly, to do so without danger to the bystanders. Obviously, the best thing to do after surmounting the difficulty of firing at all was to shut his eyes firmly and fire into the air. And as he does it, of course, a partridge falls. And Wardle's like, why, you singled out that bird? And he's like, no, you did. I saw you do it. I guess because he saw him look up or something or close his eyes. They think that Tupman is now the crack shot of the group.
I don't know how much Wardle actually believes this, but he's just such a good-humored guy.
Yeah.
He wants to play along with this idea.
That's even funnier if he's just
he
meaning
picked
to
it
say, like,
out.
I saw you close your eyes and shoot. So like that's his idea of aiming. So that's even funnier. Well, it's a lot of shooting, is tiring work in the hot sun. So now they're ready for lunch. And there's the boy with the basket, punctual as clockwork. And he says, oh, and then we get a Wellerism. Hooray. Right? Yeah, we get a Wellerism. It's time for lunch and veal pie. And you want to do the Wellerism there? Hold on, sir.
Hold on, sir, said Mr. Weller, invigorated with the prospect of refreshments. Out of the way, young leathers. If you wally my precious life, don't upset me, as the gentleman said to the driver when they was a-carrying him to Tyburn, which, of course, is funny because Tyburn Tree is the gallows.
Yes.
That's where they would execute people. So here's this guy being driven in this cart to Tyburn to be executed. And he says, if you value my precious life, don't upset me. But he's on his way to be hanged anyways.
Hey, your last trip, you want it to be comfortable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they're unpacking the food. Wheel pie, meaning veal, everyone.
Yeah.
Wheel pie, said Mr. Weller, soliloquizing as he arranged the eatables on the grass. Very good thing is wheel pie when you know the lady has made it and is quite sure it ain't kittens. And after all, though, where's the odds when they're so like wheel that the worry piemen themselves don't know the difference? Well, this is the real gross part, everybody. Sorry, I have to do this. Sam tells a story about a pieman making pies out of kittens.
Yep.
And this pieman can make a wheel of beefsteak or a beefsteak a kidney or any one of them a mutton at a minute's notice, just as the market changes and appetites vary, just by seasoning the kittens. Very gross. We'll have a little bit to say on that later. Somebody wrote me a letter about that. Before we get to the other food and drink, let me take this moment to thank you all for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of Dickens lovers worldwide. If you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission and discounts on programs and courses and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. I'm putting links in the chat as I'm talking. That's why I'm hesitating there. There are lots of great in-person and virtual programs and courses at the Rosenbach. We just, as a matter of fact, posted a whole bunch of new things that are coming up for the fall this year. Go to our website to find out about those. And our latest biblio-venture, I mentioned this earlier, our latest biblio-venture is called Sherlock Mondays. It just started last week. James, you saw the first episode? You can attest?
I did. Yeah, I missed it when it was live, but I went to YouTube and I was able to watch the recording of it. It was quite entertaining.
Good. For 30 weeks, I will be talking about Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. We began with The Study in Scarlet, and we're going to work our way through them in the order they were published and finish about halfway through all of the Sherlock stories. We'll finish with The Adventure of the Empty House. And that's because we have the manuscript for The Empty House at the Rosenbach. I have 4 great co-hosts who rotate through with me, one per episode, just like James is here today and Courtney last week and Jacob next month and Jacob next month. This one's weekly though, but it's one story a week, which is nice. Well, at least after Scarlet and Sign of 4, because the first 2 are novellas, The Study in Scarlet and The Sign of 4 novellas. So we're doing those in 2 episodes each. But then it's going to be one story per week. So it's very easy. Drop in on any Monday night for a Sherlock Holmes adventure. If you register, I will send you emails every week all about the show and what's coming up, and links and fun stuff, and the cocktail. Every week there is a Sherlock tale, I call them. Well, that name was come up with by the designer of the cocktails, Mary Alcaro. She's one of the co-hosts and also a mixologist in her part-time. And Sherlock Mondays is a lot of fun, and I hope you will join me there as well. It's going to be very busy. Now I have 2 shows. Now I have a monthly and a weekly show to do every month. So it'll be fun. You can also join us on our Facebook group page, Pickwick Monthly, for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun. And remember, you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org. And I would be happy to hear from you. Share your questions, comments, and some of those I share on this segment right now called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. I'll start off this month with my friend Graham Legg, who reminded me, this was in person, reminded me when we were at the 122nd general membership meeting of the Philadelphia Pickwick Club earlier this month. Graham had reminded me that we omitted to read one of his favorite lines in the book last month. And this occurs when Sam is recounting his rise in the world, right? From carrier boy to wagoner, up to the one day being a gentleman. And it begins, I weren't always, he's saying to Mr. Pickwick, I weren't always a boot, sir, said Mr. Weller with a shake of the head. I was a wagoner's boy once. When was that? Inquired Mr. Pickwick. And here's Graham's favorite line that I didn't read last month. When I was first pitched neck and crop into the world to play at leapfrog with its troubles, replied Sam. So I should have read that line. So I agree, Graham. I really love it too. When I was first pitched neck and crop into the world to play at leapfrog with its troubles. And it so describes not just Sam, but these other characters here who, you know, the world's full of troubles and they're going to play a game with them to get through them. And then Sam goes on, and then there's the passage where I was a carrier's boy at starting, then a wagoner's, then a helper, then a boots. Now I'm a gentleman's servant. I shall be a gentleman myself one of these days, perhaps, with a pipe in my mouth and a summer house in the back garden. Who knows? I shouldn't be surprised for one. I love that idea of Sam going on in the world. So thanks, Graham, for reminding me about that line. Henrietta J. has been sending me lots of wonderful emails about P.G. Wodehouse's connections to Dickens, too, because I'm finally reading the Wodehouse's Jeeves and Wooster stories. But she's also been sending links to various videos on YouTube about Dickens's life and times. There's a really good one that I posted today on our Facebook group about a British cooking show that went to Gad's Hill Place, where Dickens lived, you know, for the end of his life, and actually that became a girls' school in the 20th century. And when this cooking show went there, it was still the girls' school. It's not now. And the cook there went through some Victorian dishes and how to prepare them. And then Cedric Dickens, Charles's grandson, was on the show and made Smoking Bishop with him. It's a lot of fun little episode. I've started posting a lot of these videos that Henrietta has been sharing with me on our Facebook, on our Pickwick Monthly Facebook group page. But best of all, Henrietta shares these post-show musings with me, that she writes a whole long list of post-show stuff that she sends me, and I really love them. And here's a couple bits she wrote to me after watching number 6 last month. Referring to the same thing that Graham was referring to earlier about Sam telling Pickwick about his rise in the world. Henrietta writes, to see the Industrial Revolution as a means to improvement for the masses was probably not in original thinking. Sam's dream is a version of the one promoted in the US. A person's natural ability and willingness to work were more important than connections by birth. This view of success was, by the 1820s, a threat to old ways as engineers, inventors, scientists, medical practitioners, and manufacturers were infiltrating fields, and these new people were not properly bred. Wrong school, no family and government, unschooled in social behavior. As Dickens was beginning, he had no clear notion of where he could go, hoping perhaps he could support a family by acting, journalism, and novels. He had no reason to think otherwise. Napoleon and uproar in Europe were fresh memories. So I like how Henrietta ties it into also to Napoleon, the kind of rising up to be emperor. Sam has called in our chapter this month, Sam has called, Pickwick the emperor. And Dickens himself is in a sense much like, Sam. I mean, doesn't kind of quite start at the level that Sam does in life, but Dickens was in the factory pasting labels on bottles at one point, and now is being paid £25 a month for the Pickwick Papers. So, in another email, Henrietta writes, also, I noticed in reading about Partridge Hunt that Dickens gives just enough info. Oh, this is about this month, actually. She noticed that Dickens gives just enough information to describe the workings of a gun, not naming particular parts, so that the readers, many of whom knew even less about the sport, could follow along, enjoy the adventure. Dickens can be specific to describing the last bolt and color scheme of something he wants to, but he also has a writer's brush for wider strokes, giving just enough information. Is it in interest of reader, or does Dickens choose to edit what he himself knows? That's interesting to think about, and how his descriptive powers are at work there. So
I don't know any stories of Dickens using guns. There were so many different things that he was interested in trying his hand on, but I can't think of Dickens himself ever joining a shooting party or anything.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
Max M has also been sending me lots of emails, including a recipe of essence of cloves, which you can find in the a book called The Publican's Friend and Sure Guide to Do Well by S. Moore in 1812. If you just look that up, I put that title in the chat. And it is, do I have that? Oh, I do. Let me just share this recipe. We mentioned this last month, this essence of cloves. And here's a recipe for it. For extracting this essence, take 2 ounces of cloves, reduce them to coarse powder in the mortar, put the powder into a quart bottle that is fit for the purpose, and add a pint of spirit of wine to it. After 10 days operation, by shaking, etc., strain the liquor, add a pint of boiling water, and then proceed as instructed for other essences. There you go. You can make essence of clove to add to your beer, whatever you're drinking. So your punch. Essence of clove would go well in this punch I'm having here. Max also wrote to me about wheel pies and beer cans, and also a recipe for pomatum, which is a hair grease used by one of Dodson and Fogg's clerks, but I'll share that later when we get to that scene. And finally, Alicia T. wrote to me about Mrs. Leo Hunter's expiring. Should I read it? No, I won't, because I have other things to read here. I lamented myself that Dickens he didn't include more than what's the 2 stanzas.
Yeah.
And Alicia wrote, I think Dickens had the right idea to not add additional cantos. After all, brevity is the soul of wit, and you always want to leave them wanting more. The other consideration is the final couplet rather limits your options. But Alicia has given me lots of examples here of what could have been. Oozing bog, expiring frog. Nature's cog, expiring frog. In the fog, expiring frog. Drinking grog, expiring frog. Hungry hog, expiring frog. Jig and jog, expiring frog. Suffering mog, expiring frog. On the nog, expiring frog. Out to Prague, expiring frog, final sog, expiring frog, funeral tog, expiring frog, volcanic vog, expiring frog, and lastly, ziggerzog, expiring frog. Like you would run out of rhymes, sure enough. Alicia wrote, I'm sure the missus managed to craft stanzas for all the possibilities, but Dickens wisely stopped while he was ahead. Well, thank you, Alicia, for entertaining me with those. I love them. Although you do make me want, like, I want drinking grog, expiring frog as a host. I just need to write it myself. I know. I love to hear from all of you. So if anyone has a question or comment about the serial part for the month, or just Dickens in general, or about something coming up the next month, don't hesitate to drop me a note at epettit@rosenbach.org. Thank you. Let's get back to this chapter. Because now we're at the part where I can drink my punch and think, oh, that's why I get to drink this, because it is going with the story. Is that a special mug? Did we see that mug before?
Yeah, this is a Pickwick mug. So this has Mr. Pickwick and his companions getting into the coach to go to Rochester. This was given to me by some relative at some point, I believe.
Well done. All righty. Well, they've got the wheel pies and then they've got stuff to drink. They have a couple stone jars, and the boy says beer in this one, cold punch in the other. Maybe it was a lot like my fish house punch. Although if Mr. Pickwick drank as much of this fish house punch as he does there, he would have been passed out long before. And then we get another Wellerism, and I'll do this one. Sam says after the beer and the cold punch, and a worry good notion of a lunch it is. Take it all together, said Mr. Weller, surveying his arrangement of the repast with great satisfaction. Now, gentlemen, fall on, as the English said to the French when they fixed bagonets. That's a good one. Fall on, as the English said to the French when they fixed bagonets. There's something about a Wellerism too that, like, you have to say it twice. Like, because when it first comes out, it's like, what? And then you catch it, and then you repeat it, and then you really hear it. Or maybe
this is supposed to be bayonets, right?
Yes.
But he's changed it to bagonets because he doesn't pronounce things the standard way. He's Samuel Weller, after all, with a we.
Well, this is where Pickwick starts to really load up on his punch, as I will too. First of all, he's hot. It's so hot with the sun. The skin of whose oppressive countenance was rapidly peeling off with exposure to the sun. Mr. Pickwick, with great pleasure, said, a glass of punch, said Wardle. With great pleasure, said Mr. Pickwick, the satisfaction of whose countenance, after drinking it, bore testimony to the sincerity of the reply. Good, said Mr. Pickwick, smacking his lips. Very good. I'll take another. Cool, very cool. A toast, our friends at Dingley Dell. And then a little bit further on, a most capital cold punch, said Mr. Pickwick. Tupman, my dear friend, a glass of punch. Mr. Pickwick took another, just to see whether there was any orange peel in the punch. Orange peel always disagreed with him. And finding that there was not, Mr. Pickwick took another glass to the health of their absent friend, and then felt himself imperatively called upon to propose another in honor of the punch compounder, unknown.
Don't you hate it when you have 7 or 8 glasses of alcoholic punch and then you realize, oh, there was some orange peel in it. That's why I'm not feeling so great.
That's what it was. So it was the salmon. It's never the salmon. It's always the booze. And it's never the orange peel. And then Mr. Pickwick remembers a song he wants to sing, but he can't remember the words, and sought to stimulate his memory with more glasses of punch. That's how I'll remember, which appeared to have quite a contrary effect. From forgetting the words of the song, he began to forget how to articulate any words at all. And finally, after rising to his legs to address the company in an eloquent speech, he fell into the barrow and fast asleep simultaneously. Well done, Mr. Pickwick. They found it impossible to wake him, and they have to go back to the hunt. So do we take him with us? And they realize, no, just leave him here. He'll be fine. They'll do their hunt and they'll come back and pick him up after a little bit. And I'm refilling my glass because it needs that. But you need to add ice. And it's not just the ice is the cutting down on the booze. It's like it really helps the flavor with this punch. This should be a well-iced punch with the brandies and the rum together. I made a big bowl of it. I'm not going to drink it all, though, believe me. So we have the whole family coming in tomorrow, so all the kids are coming home. So I figured I can make a whole bowl. I'll have a little bit of it. It's hard to make this stuff in a very small batch. You kind of got to make it in a big batch. So we'll have it tomorrow. All righty. So they decide to leave Mr. Pickwick there, and they'll pick him up later, and they go off hunting. And while they're out, along comes Captain Boldwig, who was read that little Captain Boldwig description. That's really funny.
Captain Boldwig was a little fierce man in a stiff black neckerchief and blue surtout, who, when he did condescend to walk about his property, did it in company with a thick rattan stick and a brass ferule, and a gardener and sub-gardener with meek faces, to whom the gardeners, not the stick, Captain Boldwig gave his orders with all due grandeur and ferocity, for Captain Boldwig's wife's sister had married a marquis, and the captain's house was a villa, and his land grounds, and it was all very high and mighty and great. that self-importance of people that Dickens loves to make fun of it's because his wife's sister had married a marquis, and now suddenly he is more important than anyone else. I like this, and it's again, Dickens will create this great little character, just throwaway. It's like he's here for a couple paragraphs, then he's gone. And this is a character that could have continued. It would have continued to be funny. Captain Boldwig. Well, he's come along, and he says, remind me to have a board done about trespassers and spring guns and all that sort of thing to keep the common people out. And then they discover that somebody's had a little party here, because they can see the kind of crumbs and things left over from their luncheon, and he wishes the vagabonds here, said the captain. And they realize, what? There's Mr. Pickwick in the wheelbarrow. Who are you, you rascal? Said the captain, administering several pokes to Mr. Pickwick's body with a thick stick. What's your name? Cold Punch,
murmured Pickwick as he sank to sleep again. What does he say his name was? Punch, I think, sir, replied Wilkins. Well, that's his impudence. That's his confounded impudence, said the Captain Boldwig. He's only feigning to be asleep now, said the captain in a high passion. He's drunk. He's a drunken plebeian. Wheel him away, Wilkins. Wheel him away directly. Well, there we go. Drunken plebeians all, I salute you. They take him away to the pound. Did they say that's where they take? Yes, wheel him away. Yeah. That's what I said. Sorry, I'm drinking the punch. Inexpressible was the astonishment of the little party when they returned to find that Mr. Pickwick had disappeared and taken the wheelbarrow with him. And we are getting close to our first illustration this week. They take Mr. Pickwick to the pound, and Boldwig's people do, fast asleep in the wheelbarrow, and to the immeasurable delight and satisfaction, not only of all the boys in the village, but 3/4 of the whole population who had gathered round in expectation of his waking. Now, the pound would have been a place where all stray animals in a village are taken to. And here is the illustration from Fizz of poor Mr. Pickwick in the pound. I mean, it's like, yeah, these are pigs and goats, and is that a donkey, I think? And I guess this is a big fat pig here. And everybody having a good time looking at Mr. Pickwick as he awakens here. This hat askew. At least he kept his hat. That's nice. And you notice they have things in their hands. They're ready. They're ready here to start throwing. And it is he wakes up. Where am I? In the pound, replied the mob. How came I here? What was I doing? Where was I brought from? Boldwig, Captain Boldwig. And then he's, trying to get out. And then there came a turnip, then a potato, then an egg, with a few other little tokens of the playful disposition of the many-headed. Fizz really fills his picture here too, doesn't he? I mean, you've got the church in the town and the houses in the background. That this is one of those pictures where he's not leaving, anything to, I mean, he's trying to put everything in here that he can. And look, who's this on the side here? There's the
beetle.
Yeah, with this, you can tell with his hat and the staff. Dickens hates beetles, doesn't he? Like, is there a good beetle in a Dickens novel? I don't think so. People are always getting things over on beetles. Now, I think perhaps it's also a common thing in his age to get something over on the beetle being this, official who would, oversee certain things of the local government, and Oliver Twist, he's, overseeing the kind of workhouse, but also other things. Here we will have so suddenly the carriage with Sam and Wardle and friends comes by, and they see, like, oh my gosh, there he is, and they rush out to save him. And Wardle goes in and grabs Pickwick and puts him in the carriage, and Sam Sam gets in the vehicle just as he had concluded the third and last round of a single combat with the town beetle. So, and I love that there's the line that then Fizz is like, oh, I got to make sure I add a beetle to the picture. So, because Sam is going to fight him, and Sam's yelling at them as they're riding away that, I'll come back tomorrow and spile him. I'll fight the beetle again. Pickwick is indignant, of course, that he was stuck in the pound for everyone to make fun of and throw, vegetables at. And he says, let's read the end of this here. I'll give directions for the commencement of an action for false imprisonment against this Captain Boldwig directly I get to London, said Mr. Pickwick as soon as the carriage turned out of the town.
We were trespassing, it seems, said Wardle.
I don't care, said Mr. Pickwick. I'll bring the action.
No, you won't, said Wardle.
I will, But as there was a humorous expression in Wardle's face, Mr. Pickwick checked himself and said, why not?
Because, said old Wardle, half bursting with laughter, because they might turn round on some of us and say we had taken too much cold punch.
Do what he would, a smile would come into Mr. Pickwick's face. The smile extended into a laugh, the laugh into a roar, the roar became general. So, to keep up their good humor, they stopped at the first roadside tavern they came to and ordered a glass of brandy and water all round, with a magnum of extra strength for Mr. Samuel Weller. So I love that Mr. Pickwick sees the humor in his own, embarrassments, and I also love that they're like, yeah, let's stop for another drink. And they do. Well, more drinking. There's just it's eating and drinking. Is there a part without eating and drinking? I don't think there has been one. I love that about this. Well, I have a little more to say about this scene too a little later when we get to something else about how this is an important contrast between what happens to Pickwick here and what happens to him in this next chapter, which is chapter 20. Showing how Dodson and Fogg were men of business and their clerks men of pleasure, and how an affecting interview took place between Mr. Weller and his long-lost parent, showing also what choice spirits assembled at the Magpie and Stump, and what a capital chapter the next one will be. Don't just read this one. Well, just read the first paragraph.
In the ground floor front of a dingy house, at the very furthest end of Freeman's Court, Cornhill, sat the 4 clerks of Messrs. Dodson and Fogg, 2 of His Majesty's attorneys of the Courts of King's Bench and Common Pleas at Westminster, and solicitors of the High Court of Chancery. The aforesaid clerks, catching about as favorable glimpses of heaven's light and heaven's sun in the course of their daily labors, as a man might hope to do, were he placed at the bottom of a reasonably deep well, without the opportunity of perceiving the stars in the daytime, which the latter secluded situation affords. The clerk's office.
Well,
Sure.
That's where I would add, because I just wanted to add that Dickens knew this.
Yeah.
Dickens was a law clerk, a junior law clerk, at 15 years old in 1827. He has survived the blacking labels, the labels in the blacking factory, and now has done a little school, and then his parents like, all right, back to work. So he becomes a junior clerk at a solicitor's firm called Ellis and Blackmore. Dickens's mother actually knew Edward Blackmore from connection through where they were staying. And there's a little in this wonderful book called Becoming Dickens, the Robert Douglas Fairhouse book about Dickens's early life and career. He describes, he has this little paragraph that starts with a quote from somebody. It was a poor old set of chambers, recalled George Lear, who had been articled 2 years previously to the senior partner, Edward Ellis, and Dickens soon slipped into the sleepy routines of office life, copying papers, dealing with clients, and carrying legal documents to and from some of London's 150-odd public offices. Many of their names sounded like the inventions of a satirist: the Alienation Office, the Dispensation Office, the Six Clerks Office, the Prothonotary Office, the Sixpenny Receiver's Office. From January 5 to March 16, 1828, Dickens was responsible for keeping the petty cash book. He stayed with the firm for 18 months. He was making 15 shillings per week at the end. I don't know if he started that. There are lots of law clerks in Dickens's fiction, and it's never an admirable thing to be. I mean, the biggest one I think of is Guppy, obviously, Mr. Guppy in Bleak House. I mean, you don't want to be in this. It's like a dead end thing. Like you think you're rising up, but it kind of caps you, and you don't really get out of this kind of law clerk position.
Unless you're Uriah Heep, who's also a law clerk, but then in his trying to rise, he does it not the most ethical manner.
Well, unless you're evil. So if you're evil, you can rise to any heights, of course. You will pay the price in a Dickens novel, but you can rise. This is also when Dickens first started learning shorthand, is when he became a legal clerk. And then and then developed that even further in his next position when he was doing shorthand in the legal proceedings in the court trials. But Dickens knows this life. These law clerks here at Dodson and Fogg, Dickens did this. He sat there in, copying papers and doing things and joking around and fooling around with the other clerks, just like they're doing. And I keep saying clerks as if they're clerks, and they're not. They're clerks. So sorry. I meant to say Clarks the whole time. So, but I'm American. So
we remembered it's Marquis.
There you go. Marquis. Yes, it is Marquis. Not Marquis. We're not French. Fixing their bagonets. So Mr. Pickwick is paying a visit to this office, Dodson and Fogg, with Sam, of course. Thank God Sam's going with him. And he inquires, Mr. Dodson ain't at home. Mr. Fogg's particularly engaged. And then it was a ragged head, the sandy hair of which scrupulously parted on one side and flattened down with pomatum, was twisted into little semicircular tails around a flat face ornamented with a pair of small eyes and garnished with a very dirty shirt collar and a rusty black stock. That's the clerk that's telling Dickens this. I didn't have a note about pomatum, and I should have, because it's an unusual thing. But Max M., who wrote to me, had looked up, thought the same thing, and he looked up pomatum, and he found this bit. It was from a site. It's from an author named Jerry Walton. I put the link in the live chat, and Jerry Walton has written, the name pomatum was derived from pomum, an apple, because it was originally made by macerating overripe apples in Greece. No idea. It was created from fats such as lard, tallow, or marrow. To create a pomatum at home involved a tedious process. This all has to be put into your hair, as the fat had to be inodorous and thoroughly cleansed to prevent rancidity. Imagine if it didn't. Otherwise, a bad odor would emanate from the fat, and scenting the odorous pomade would cost more to cover the bad odor than to deodorize it. In the 1800s, because pure inodorous fat was so difficult to obtain, people living near London sometimes purchased it from Mr. Ewan, as he was considered to be the best fat purifier in London. Are you the best fat purifier in London? I would love to have that title. I'm the best fat purifier in London. And because he employed a stone roller and flowing water to achieve his inodorous fat. Max, after all that, wrote gross. I thought that was funny. But that's what people would put in their hair. I mean, bear grease was a big thing too. So the fat from a bear was made into a pomade for your hair. But I didn't realize that pomade the word itself is related to apple, and that's where it originally comes from. So
I did not know that either.
Thank you for sending that to me. We had another thing, there's another thing in the text here, because one of the other clerks is mixing a seidlitz powder under cover of the lid of his desk as they're talking. And a seidlitz powder is a laxative. Mm-hmm. And it made me wonder, and he's doing it under his desk. Is he doing this because he's constipated, because he's a clerk sitting in a chair all day? Or is this going to be a trick for somebody? Now, Dickens doesn't follow up with this, but I wonder if he has that idea that, like, he's going to feed this to somebody. And then because that's what these clerks do. They're kind of playing tricks on each other all the time. Dickens actually tells us, there's a story about Dickens that when he was a clerk at this Ellis and Blackmore, that one time they moved to quarters that were kind of elevated, and Dickens used to drop cherry stones, and he's leaning out the window and drop cherry stones under the heads of the people walking under, and as a fun time. So Well, here's the clock, and they're having the fun, these clocks together. That was a game, wasn't it? Devilish good. It was so, I was so uncommonly lushy. They're talking about, their time outside and getting drunk and doing things. And then one of them starts to tell this story about old Fogg here, the lawyer who they work for, who filed. Someone comes in and is trying to pay his bill, and Fogg says, "Oh, there was a declaration file which increases the costs materially." And the guy's like, "What? I brought enough to pay you." And he says, "Oh, sorry, my clerk's just gone to file it." Hasn't Mr. Jackson gone to file that declaration? They're like, "Oh, of course he has." And then after the guy leaves, realizing, "Oh my gosh, I have to pay even more money and I can't afford this." And it turns out that then Fogg turns to his clerk and says, "Here, Wicks, take a cab, go down the Temple as quick as you can and file that." It's the thing that he said was already filed, which was going to increase the number, the price. But he also says that the costs are quite safe, for he's a steady man with a large family at a salary of 25 shillings a week. And if he gives us a warrant of attorney, as he must in the end, I know his employers will see it paid. So we may as well get all we can out of him, Mr. Wicks. It's a Christian act to do it, Mr. Wicks, for with his large family and small income, he'll be all the better for a good lesson against getting into debt. Like he's the worst, right? Fogg here, like he's not only kind of screw as much money as he can, he's Scrooge, right? But he's even got the like Scrooge would never say, "I'm doing it for your own good, and it's because I'm a Christian." Like that kind of hypocrisy is really, nasty. I mean, this is funny stuff in a sense, but I think it's also angering for people, especially in Dickens's time, because we might think the court system is difficult nowadays and labyrinthine and hard, but in Dickens's day, what he's describing is not exaggeration. This actually happens. This is all kinds of court costs would happen, just some different filings and things, and lawyers were in charge of all of it. It wasn't like, "I didn't tell you to file that." It's, lawyers did all that stuff and you were responsible for the court costs, regardless of what the lawyers did. Dickens learns this lesson when he sues over the pirating of, was it Christmas Carol or Nickleby?
I believe it was Christmas Carol.
Yeah, Christmas Carol. And he winds up winning the case and then has to pay all the legal fees. The courts in Dickens's day especially were an intricate system of money making. They were not a system of upholding the law. Not these civil courts at all. It was not about that. It was about they're running a system of how they can make money. And it's just, horrible. So it must have really angered people. Like I think like funny, but angering for people reading it in Dickens's day. "Well, Mr. Wellers is nice men, these here, sir." Very nice notion of fun they has, sir. And Mr. Pickwick is still waiting. And then we'll get to the other illustration here. Mr. Jackson departed stairs on his errand and returned immediately with a message that Mr. Fogg would see Mr. Pickwick in 5 minutes, and having delivered it, returned again to his desk. "What did he say his name was?" whispered Wicks. "Pickwick," replied Jackson. "It's the defendant in Bardell and Pickwick." A sudden scraping of feet, mingled with the sound of suppressed laughter, was heard from behind the partition. "They're a twigging of you, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "Twigging of me, Sam," replied Mr. Pickwick. "What do you mean by twigging me?" Well, what he means by twigging is exactly what's going on in the illustration, which I will share now. This is the Fizz illustration in the office, and everything's described like the stand, the things hanging on the wall, to everything going on here. This is kind of in the thing, and here they are. And twigging apparently is to watch, to look at, to inspect, and it's one of those unknown, origin kind of things. So there they are, twigging him as they're all watching. Mr. Pickwick's looking a little downcast here, but Sam looking a little more respectable than I think, than he's usually portrayed. But you can see he's got the striped waistcoat here underneath, and then just his, clothes and the little hat. But this, I don't know, he's just looking very nice and respectable. More so than I usually imagine Sam. But then I only imagine him from other people's illustrations. So, I think, oh, that's not usually the way they portray him. So, but there we go. Sam and Pickwick. Sam's kind of, he's telling him what he is, but it almost looks like he's consoling him in a sense, which is big, Mr. Pickwick is reliant upon Sam by this point. And these nasty boys with their pomade, twigging and making fun of him. A little fizz signature down here. All righty. Mr. Pickwick goes in to see Fogg. And he is, Mr. Pickwick takes a survey of the man of business, who is an elderly, pimply-faced, vegetable diet sort of man. Meat eaters love that kind of description. We're like, vegetable diet. So, in a black coat, dark mixture trousers, and small black gaiters, a kind of being who seemed to be an essential part of the desk at which he was writing, and to have as much thought or feeling. And then Mr. Dodson comes in, and he's a plump, portly, stern-looking man with a loud voice. Not as much description for Dodson. Well, they tell he's talking to Pickwick, why are you here? And he's the defendant, and Mr. Pickwick's like, what do you mean? I received your letter, and I'm wondering what's going on. What are the grounds? Read that for the grounds of action, sir.
Grounds of? Fogg had ejaculated thus much when he was stopped by Dodson. Mr. Fogg, said Dodson, I'm going to speak. I beg your pardon.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Dodson.
I'd forgotten how funny that little line was. Mr. Dodson, I'm going to speak.
For the grounds of action, sir, continued Dodson, with moral elevation in his air, you will consult your own conscience and your own feelings. We, sir, we are guided entirely by the statement of our client. That statement, sir, may be true, or it may be false. It may be credible, or it may be incredible. But if it be true, and if it be credible, I do not hesitate to say, sir, that our grounds of action, sir, are strong and not to be shaken. You may be an unfortunate man, sir, or you may be a designing one. But if I were called upon as a juryman upon my oath, sir, to express an opinion of your conduct, sir, I do not hesitate to assert that I should have but one opinion about it. Here Dodson drew himself up with an air of offended virtue, and looked at Fogg, who thrust his hands further in his pockets, and nodding his head sagely said, in a tone of the fullest concurrence, most certainly.
With a kind of attitude that kind of reminds me of what will become Pecksniffian. This kind of, and it's even hinted at there, the with an air of offended virtue. That he doesn't believe a word that he's saying. This is a stance that he's taken for his own benefit. And Dickens gets that kind of just right. It also reminds me a little of Polonius, that kind of officious, disingenuous, speech there that I can really, hear coming out, and well read. Thank you. Well, Pickwick pleads his innocence. There's, I didn't do anything wrong. I can't believe he's shocked at what's going on here. and they can't believe he's shocked, right? And this is the moment that I hinted at earlier, that like I think this is Pickwick in the beginning of the novel is only this naive bumbler, and he's very quixotic in the very Quixote sense, that like, I don't really know what's going on, so I'm going to get in these weird situations, and they'll be comic, and I'll kind of suffer from them, but only in a comic way. And then later we will start to, well, we start to see him now, I think, as the happy innocent, and then as the novel progresses, he'll be this kind of representation of joy, but it's a situation like this, I think, that starts to swing our sympathy in his favor, to move from this naive bumbler to somebody who is innocent and put upon. And it's easy to laugh at him in the wheelbarrow, and he laughs too, because like, it's his own fault that he's in the wheelbarrow. But now his innocence is being punished by other people, and he's being punished by the kind of people who really are, for all intents and purposes, evil. They're just out to like swindle money from people, and that sympathetic turn, I think, is different than the laughing at Mr. Pickwick getting in funny situations. And I think this is the turning point in the novel, that we will start to then see how we view Mr. Pickwick as a person and what he represents change. Sorry, that was a little soapboxy, but that's
well, he did do something to get into this situation. He did not have to have the conversation with Mrs. Bardell that way. He could have handled that a little better.
It was a total mistake, though, like a total misunderstanding. It's not like I got drunk and fell asleep. That's different. Like, you got drunk, dude. You put the about, like, this is completely like, I didn't mean any of that. And that's different than like, I did something to cause, like I've ran around and my hat flew off and I had to run around after, like,
but let's remember, though, when that mistaken proposal scene happens, we the reader do not know yet that Pickwick has thought about employing Sam. And so when we read it the first time, it probably does sound a little bit like a proposal. And so
I'm not sure. I have to look at the text. I think I'm not sure.
I've heard that two can live as cheaply as one. That kind of sounds like the person who is laying the groundwork.
Understandable confusion on Mrs. Bardell's part, but it's not his fault.
No, but if this were simply a matter of Mrs. Bardell getting at him, we would, I think, be more understandable. Same as he was trespassing,
right?
And
it would be a comic scene if then Mrs. Bardell's like, oh, and then he has to explain to her, that's kind of funny. But now it's taken a different turn.
He has done absolutely nothing to Dodson and Fogg.
Yeah,
he might have done something to Mrs. Bardell, but he's done nothing to Dodson and Fogg, and they probably know that this suit is pretty groundless. It certainly, I think, is not worth £1,500. And they
like a landlady, right? Like the landlady of this place. I mean, really, that she's going to be in danger of, of anything. So yeah.
And I think that figure of £1,500 was outrageously high for this case, and they know it and they don't care, because they're just out to make money for themselves, regardless of how unethically they act and regardless of who it hurts. And so, this is, as you said, this is Pickwick encountering evil.
Yeah. And because even with Jingle, it's kind of like Jingle's just playing tricks on him, Jingle's not trying to hurt him in a sense. He does things that he like. I'm going to put Pickwick in a position where he's got to like trouble and explain himself out of it. That's different than this. I think.
And I wonder if part of this has to do with the anxiety caused by urbanization.
Yeah.
When he's thrown into the pound, that is specifically a rural setting, and he's there with the farm animals, and it's bad, but he can get over that.
Yep.
But now that we're in the city, how do you get over a lawsuit from these conniving lawyers?
Yeah.
The things that you get up to out in the country, you can get out of that pretty quickly. You may not like it, it might be unpleasant, but ultimately you can laugh it off. But now that we're in London, it's much more dangerous.
In 1827, not even Sherlock Holmes can save you, because even if he says, like, this is what's going on, the lawyers would be like, doesn't matter. I just filed this writ. That's going to cost you another 10 pounds.
Yep.
You know, like, none of it matters. It's just, he's in the system. It's Kafka-esque, right? It's like, I'm in this system and I can't change. Like, how do I? No, sorry, you're here now. So it's Terry Gilliam's Brazil movie. Like, you're stuck in this. Like, there's no way to get out of it. Well, Mr. Pickwick is like indignant, you know, it's disgraceful and rascally. And they're like, what? Say that again. And they want him to say something slanderous. And they even try to bait him into assault, which is funny. You know, go on, call us thieves. You would like to assault one of us. Pray do it, sir, if you would. We will not make the smallest resistance. Pray do it, sir. And they call in the clerks to say, you know, witness all this. And Sam comes in to save the day. You must come away, said Mr. Weller. Battledore and shuttlecock's a very good game when you ain't the shuttlecock and two lawyers the battledores, in which case it gets too exciting to be pleasant. So Sam's trying to get him out of that situation before he's knocked around by these two guys, these two lawyers, any longer than he is. They leave. Pickwick realizes that, well, first he says, you know, again, as soon as they leave, they have to go and find Mr. Perker, the lawyer who was Wardle's lawyer, who was the one that went to catch Miss Rachel and Jingle together when Pickwick first met Sam. Perker's also the guy that introduced him to Eatanswill, that they went to visit there, and they got to know Eatanswill. But I didn't want to miss this line. Without the slightest ceremony, they leave Dodson and Fogg's offices. Without the slightest ceremony, Mr. Weller hauled his master down the stairs and down the court, and having safely deposited him in Cornhill, fell behind, prepared to follow him whithersoever he should lead. That's a very, you know, quixotic Don Quixote kind of thing. Like, he's like, I'm the guide with you. We're gonna head off on our adventure here, whithersoever he should lead. And also kind of hints at Sam's devote. Like, Sam's already like, I'm gonna take care of you. Don't worry. Sam will be there with him to the end. I will go immediately to Mr. Perker's, but we will go there at once. But first, as I have been rather ruffled, I should like a glass of brandy and water warm. Sam, where can I have it? And first, let's get a drink, because it's Pickwick Papers and they have to have a drink constantly. And people wonder why I love this novel. Well, they shouldn't wonder. But Sam, knowing London so well, like, oh, you want brandy and water? And like, look at, like, this is exactly where I am. Second court on the right-hand side, last house but one on the same side of the bay. Take the boxes, stand in the first fireplace, because there ain't no leg in the middle of the table, which all the others has, and it's very inconvenient. So Sam knows exactly where to get a good drink and what table to sit at in the bar. And they head off to go get a drink before they find Perker. And this tavern happens to be have the special patronage of stagecoachmen. Among the number was one stout, red-faced elderly man in particular, seated in an opposite box, who attracted Mr. Pickwick's attention. The stout man was smoking with great vehemence, but between every half dozen puffs, he took his pipe from his mouth and looked first at Mr. Weller and then at Mr. Pickwick. Then he would bury in a quart pot as much of his countenance as the dimensions of the quart pot admitted of its receiving, and take another look at Sam and Mr. Pickwick. Then he would take another half dozen puffs with an air of profound meditation and look at them again. At last, the stout man, putting up his legs on the seat and leaning his backs against the wall, began to puff at his pipe without leaving off at all, and to stare through the smoke at the newcomers as if he had made up his mind to see the most he could of them. And it turns out this is Sam's father, Mr. Weller. There he is. Put that a little closer. Mr. Weller.
Yeah, a plate that was given to me by a friend, because even though, you would think of all the Dickens characters, really Tony Weller, that's the one you're going to put on a plate. But there he is. He was very popular.
Enormously popular. And that illustration of him there is a lot like, he's usually like massive.
Yeah.
Massively heavy.
They sort of slimmed him down for this plate.
I had to fit him on the plate.
They don't want to remind you of, being oversized as you're eating. That might discourage the eating.
Well, this is a novel that encourages eating, let me tell you. Well, he's blowing smoke through his pipe, and he finally says, "Why, Sammy?" And it turns out it's Sam's father, and Sam says, "It's the old one." "What old one?" "My father, sir. How are you, my ancient?" He says, the father says, "I haven't seen you for 2 years and better." And then Sammy says, "How's mother-in-law?" Meaning the widder that Tony Weller has married. And remember, they're earlier on, when Sam first meets Pickwick, he tells him the story about how Sam's going to inherit his coachman father's wealth, right? But his father went and got married to a widow instead, and now Sam's kind of out in the cold. Wouldn't inherit the riches of this coachman. But this is Mr. Weller, Tony Weller. He says about his wife. That's what he means by mother-in-law. Is his mother-in-law for Sam is his father's. It's really his
stepmother is what we would say. But you see all sorts of people in this period using mother-in-law for stepmother.
Yeah. Mr. Weller says, "There never was a nicer woman as a widder. That ere second wenture of mine, a sweet creature she was. But then she changed her condition. She don't act as a wife, Sammy. And she's now a little troublesome for him. She says, take example by your father, my boy, and be very careful of widders all your life, especially if they've kept the public house, Sammy." And he refilled his pipe from a tin box he carried in his pocket and lighted his fresh pipe from the ashes of the old one, and commenced smoking at a great rate. So maybe that's why I like him so much, because he's all smoking his pipe in every scene that he's in. Something I do too. That's his widder warning that he's giving. And then Mr. Weller puts him on the trail of Jingle and Trotter. He says that, they describe them, and he's like, I drove them to Ipswich. He's actually seen them and in a coach, and that he drove and took them to Ipswich. And Mr. Pickwick's like, "Great, we'll follow them there." He says, "I heard them laughing and saying how they done old fireworks." Mr. Pickwick does not like being referred to as old fireworks. There is nothing positively vile or atrocious in the appellation of old fireworks, but still, it is by no means respectful or flattering designation. Pickwick says, "We're going to follow them there. First, though, a small glass of brandy to drink your health and success to Sammy." They do that, and then Mr. Weller says he's found a sovereign cure for the gout. And now we get like into the this is the way this novel started. Like Pickwick and his friends are going around getting information and copying things down. And Mr. Pickwick's like, a cure for the gout? What is it? And his cure for the gout is
marry a widder.
Is to marry a widder. That's it. Because you'll never have the gout again. If you marry a widder who's got a loud voice with a decent notion of using it, you'll never have the gout again. It's a capital prescription, sir. I takes it regular and can warrant it to drive away any illness as is caused by too much jollity. And then we get the final Wellerism of this part today. Do you have that? Think, sir, replied Mr. Weller.
Think, sir, replied Mr. Weller. Why, I think he's the victim of connubiality, as Bluebeard's domestic chaplain said, with a tear of pity when he burned him.
Buried him.
Oh, buried him, sorry.
Bluebeard's domestic chaplain, yes.
Yes.
A victim of connubiality. Bluebeard, everyone, is the one that killed all his wives and put their bodies in a closet, and then his new wife found them. Well, Pickwick now finally goes to find a Perker, but he's not at the office in Gray's Inn, which is actually where Dickens' law clerk was at Gray's Inn. Gray's Inn was one of the 4 inns of court for barristers and judges where they would work and live. And so again, this setting here where Dickens has his characters in is a setting that Dickens knows well. They go off, they're sent off by the cleaning lady to go off to find Mr. Lowton, who works for Perker at the Magpie and Stump. And this place is, and then it's the company of clerks who are just sitting around drinking after work and singing songs and telling jokes, and they invite Pickwick in, and Pickwick goes in to ask them, and he winds up being one of the group, and they tell him Perker's not in town, but they'll help him until then. And Mr. Pickwick could not resist so tempting an opportunity of studying human nature. He suffered himself to be led to the table where, after having been introduced to the company in due form, he was accommodated with a seat near the chairman and called for a glass of his favorite beverage. So probably brandy and water, but for me today, it's still cold punch.
Magpie and Stump was right by Old Bailey, where the criminal courts were. So it makes sense all of the attorneys and their clerks would be hanging out there. And I know I've told you before about the Dickens game, the Charles Dickens board game.
Yeah.
There are 4 coaching inns, and what should appear here but the Magpie and Stump.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, it's one of the coaching ends you can go to in the Charles Dickens board game, which nobody should ever play under any circumstances. It's like one of the worst board games ever devised.
Well,
but of course,
it sounds like it's one of those games you play if you're well lubricated. So
yes,
if you can make it into a drinking game, it might be fun, right? Because Pickwick now becomes the observer again. This is what he likes to do, and well, of course, how easy it's to be an observer when you can get your glass of your favorite beverage while you're observing. And to end the chapter here, they're trying to get someone to sing. Nobody's going to sing. And then Pickwick kind of makes an observation about Gray's Inn, where Perker's place was. And then Lowton says like, oh, Jack Bamber, they'll tell a great story. And then this old man stands up and bursts into an animated torrent of words. As this chapter has been a long one, however, and as the old man was a remarkable personage, it will be more respectful to him and more convenient to us to let him speak for himself in a fresh one. So we have to wait for our tale. Just like the first, was it the first one or was the second one ended? And then we had the tale. So
yeah,
the first one ended, and then we get the tale in the second. Dickens is doing that. Next month, we'll find out. We'll start with an interpolated tale, which will take the whole first chapter of number 8. So, all righty. Well, we've gone on long enough today, James. Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 7 of Pickwick Monthly. James, thank you so much for joining us on our Pickwickian travels here. You will return in a few months. Never soon enough, but as we're monthly, it's like, I gotta wait for a few months to see James again. Coming up next month, everyone, my Pickwickian co-host will be Jacob Romanow, who I'll be very happy to see return for issue number 8, chapters 21 to 23. We'll start with the tale about the queer client. It's called it's the tale of the queer client, told in the Magpie and Stump. And then Pickwick and Sam are on the trail of Jingle and Trotter once again, and we get a romantic adventure with a lady in yellow curl papers. So that will be fun. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos, and and also to ask you to support the Rosenbach through a donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also helps us care for our collections. You can also become a member of the Rosenbach. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library. I will see you all next month for number 8 of the Pickwick Papers. Beware of wheel pies, too much cold punch, and watch out for the widders.